I was diagnosed with OCD at 15, but like a lot of people that have an OCD diagnosis, I wasn't aware that it was OCD initially, or what OCD was, or anything that it entailed. And I struggled for a long time at school. It affected my GCSEs, my A-levels, to a point where in between the ages of 18 and 20, I was virtually bedbound for 9 months, at which my dad had to make sure I was cleaned, dressed, washed, and obviously you can imagine at that age, especially being a young guy as well, having my dad have to do all of those things for me. It was an incredibly stressful, difficult period of my life. It was really hard, and it got to a point where one day, and me and my dad couldn't even hug each other for comfort or strength or support, and he broke down and said, "Why don't we just end it together now?" Because I had no life and he had no life. It was killing both of us. I lost about 4 stone over that period of time, and I was so incredibly ill. And it was almost that at that moment when all of the lights came back on and the backup generator started, and it was like, right, Rich, you need to sort something out now because you're killing your dad. And that was really my kickstart to change my life and say, well, I'm not going to give in to this anymore. I'm not going to let this be something that takes over my life. I'm going to, use the strength that I have to endure this for so long. So I moved away. I completely changed my life as such. It was just a case of getting on and just doing and really not thinking about anything. But it was so hard being away from that support network. Anyone that has been sent away for treatment that's across the country, anyone that's had difficulty accessing treatment locally will know that the biggest help that you can have is your support network at home or wherever you consider is your base. And to be away from that and to continue to struggle with the thoughts and feelings and fears and worries that I had was just so difficult. But since then, and I remember the journey, I travelled up, I was living in London, but I moved up to Blackpool where I had family, and I remember the journey because it was on the opening day of the Olympics in London. So everybody was flooding in, and me and Dad were going out on our own. And it felt quite symbolic that I was just journeying out into nowhere on my own. And when I left Dad, I genuinely thought I would never see him again. I thought I'd never come home. So to be reunited a year and a half later with him in Leicester Square is one of those moments where, Coldplay's Fix You's playing in the background as we walk together and all that kind of stuff. And since then, it's just been a daily battle to, fight back. And to think that 3 years ago at the last OCD Action Conference, I was in the audience like you guys, and I was quite ill. I had to put my coat over the chair so I didn't touch anything, and all this stuff. And now, 3 years later, I'm here, as Piers said, I'm the chair for the Youth Advisory Panel at OCD Youth. I do a lot of campaigning work with other mental health charities. I've done a Tough Mudder, which for anyone that has any idea of contamination OCD can imagine was ridiculous. I remember standing at the first obstacle, and it was to crawl through barbed wire and mud, and I just stood there and froze for 10 seconds, and it was my brain's way of going, well, this is it. You either literally jump in the mud or you lose. And my mate just grabbed me and went, come on, let's go, and threw me into the mud. So I had no choice. But that moment was liberating, because in that instantaneous moment of me hitting the mud and being completely, literally covered in all my fears, my brain went quiet for the first time in 8 years. And I didn't think about OCD for the next 2 hours because I was just having fun and in the ultimate exposure. And that was the first time I actually went, okay, maybe exposure therapy has something to going for it. I'll give it a go. And it's been, again, just, a daily progress of doing it all the time. And you do have to just keep living to keep living. It sounds so simple, but it's so hard, but it's the only thing you can do. And I kind of wanted to just talk about my 3 things that I use and use all the time to get by. So the first thing is acceptance. That's not to be confused with giving up or giving in, but just acknowledging what's happening in your life and accepting what's happening in your life. And it's not putting any feelings or attachments to that. It's just, I accept that this is sometimes how my life is. And that's not giving in, that's not, But that really was the moment for me where I went, okay, this is what's happened to me. This is what I think about sometimes now. That's it. I'm not alone. We're all here because we all have some interest in OCD, and we all have some knowledge and experience of intrusive thoughts. The second thing is actually 3 pillars, and they all start with P. It's perseverance, persistence, and practice. You have to be persistent, you have to do it all the time, and you have to persevere, because if you don't, that is giving up. And you can get better, you can work through this, so you persevere. But the third one, practice, is probably the most important of the 3, because perfect doesn't exist, but practice makes progression. And if you progress, that's a step forward, and you progress by practicing it. But my last point, and the one that is vital for me, and is the one that, anyone sitting in this room today that is struggling right now, as I was 3 years ago, and has no hope, and thinks that there's no point and wants to give up, I am the living embodiment and proof that it does get better. So the third thing is, there is hope. I sat there and thought, what is the point every day to carrying on, to fighting, to keeping on at this infinite struggle that we have against OCD? And the point is life and hope, and the very, very tiny, tiny things, like now being able to hug my dad without asking him to put new clothes on all the time, and being able to go outside without worrying that I'm going to contract tuberculosis or something. It's being able to make a cup of tea and make a sandwich, and instead of breaking down, being able to just do it. And okay, it might take 5-10 minutes longer than someone else, but I can do it, I can live. And it's by hoping and using that and the support systems that I've relied on. And I just want to take a quick second to thank everyone at OCD Action, because they've been invaluable, from the staff, the volunteers. In particular, I'd just like to thank Olivia and Rochelle, because without them, I know that it would have been so hard for me, and in terms of Rochelle, for me and my dad specifically. So I just want to thank them, and to anyone here who thinks that there's no point and that OCD is too hard, you can get through, you can fight back, you can live a life that isn't dominated by OCD, and there is always hope. Thank you. A lot of talk about social media is negative. There's lots of sort of buzz stuff at the minute about how badly it's affecting young children and the mental health of our young people. But the power of social media and the great benefit of social media is that you get to connect with people from all over the world. And last year, that was the case for myself and Chris. So we got in touch through, I think it was various OCD and mental health people on Twitter, and we got talking, and it was a great moment where Chris just got what I was saying, I got what Chris was saying, and we connected and we bonded. And the power of social media gives me the pleasure now to introduce Chris, who is the producer of Unstuck, an OCD kids movie, which we're going to sort out now for you. And I will now hand over to Chris to take you through the rest of the next session. Thank you.